Welcome to the Fully Delighted Podcast, a hopeful and helpful resource from South Mountain Community Church, a multi-site church in Utah. Each week we will be hearing from our staff as we explore what makes SMCC unique, as well as what it means to be fully devoted and fully delighted in Jesus Christ. We hope this podcast can be a helpful resource for you to take your next step with Jesus.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Fully Delighted Podcast. Pastor Eric here with Pastor Trevor, and we are starting a brand new discussion today, really a brand new series studying through the book, the message, the sermon, the homily, the talk that is known as Hebrews. Trevor, are you excited?
Yes, I am so excited. For these 10 weeks, should be great. Walking through this, as you said, this letter, this sermon, this sermonic letter.
Yes. Letter is the word we use, only because we use letter so much in the New Testament for anything after the book of Acts. But it's really not a letter. It's not shaped up as a letter. So if we say letter, know that that's out of habit probably.
Yeah, for sure.
For the listener out there at SMCC, we have a real rhythm here of... a couple things. We like to balance a real topical series followed up with a real exegetical series. So we go back and forth on, like marriage, for example, and then a book from the Bible, and then back to Is the Bible Reliable? So another topical series after Easter. And so we are in that rhythm now into a book that I've just found incredibly powerful, difficult, and challenging. For me personally, also for the predominant culture of Utah. I think this book is incredible. And so we've titled this discussion, Just Jesus, the series Just Jesus. What more could you want? And so we're really just going to be talking about Jesus, just him alone. And that's what the book of Hebrews is really all about. And so we got a lot to cover. Let's do a little bit of background work first here, Trevor. What do we know about the setting of this writing, the setting of this document, so that our listeners are up to speed sort of on this brand new world that you have to kind of dive into to understand the writing as a whole?
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things about the book of Hebrews is that when it comes to those details, like author and audience and location and all of that, we still know a lot, but we know less, actually, than we do for most of the other books of the New Testament. And so, when it comes to author, for example, every other book in the New Testament, we know who wrote it. When it comes to the book of Hebrews, we have a lot of really good guesses, but we don't know.
Right.
And the interesting thing is we're actually in the same boat as the church fathers, significant leaders in the church as early as 2nd and 3rd century. They didn't know who wrote it. Obviously, the original audience, they knew who they were, and they knew who the author was. And we got some good guesses that I think are worth working through. But we don't necessarily know the details. So those guesses, you want to walk through some of them?
Well, yeah, but let me just say this. If someone's new to the Bible, should that concern them? Should they feel insecure about this book? Like, who put it in the Bible? If we don't even know who wrote it, why take it as authoritative?
Yeah, no, great question. I think that is a legitimate question to ask. Maybe on the one hand, you could be like, well, no, you just need to accept it and go with it. But that's not actually a helpful response, I think, to any question.
Right.
Because questions can lead us on a journey to truth. And so with that being the case, I think it's worth looking into author and audience and these different things and just to consider it all under the umbrella of the question, why was the decision made to include this within the biblical writings? And are those reasons still legitimate today?
Yeah. Yeah, and so we're going to hit this in our follow-up to the Easter, to the series after Easter. But really, I've landed on 4 tests. I got this from the work of Greg Gilbert in his book, Is the Bible Trustworthy? But the 4 tests, I think I have them off the top of my head, for whether a book would be considered authoritative, canonical. These were the 4 tests. Author, so who wrote it? Another way to say it is apostolicity. Was it written by apostle or a close acquaintance or colleague? Antiquity, how old was it? Universality, was it accepted universally by the Christians in the 1st century, like basically right away? And orthodoxy, did I say that? Orthodoxy, that's the 4th one?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, and orthodoxy would be, does it hold to the main teachings of biblical Christianity? And this book passes 3 of those tests with a breeze. Orthodoxy?
Yeah.
Just Jesus. So the orthodoxy is absolutely there. It aligns with everything Paul said, what the Gospels are teaching. So it passes the orthodoxy test, passes the antiquity test. It's very ancient, very old. Yeah. We know that because if it was written to Jewish people post the destruction of the temple, you would see that in the work. And we don't want to see that. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's... Yeah, basically the temple in Jerusalem, centerpiece of the sacrificial system, was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans.
Yep.
And you can see from some of the things happening within the letter that hadn't occurred yet.
Right.
So it's absolutely dated prior to
Yep.
that.
So it's very, very old. And then universality, was it accepted? Yeah. The fact that it is written the way that it is without an author tells us it was accepted on the merits of its content alone. That's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
But of course, if it was written by some Yahoo, some pseudepigrapha, pseudepigrapha means false writing, like someone pretending to be an apostle, it would have been ruled out. Because that was happening, and those books were ruled out.
Yeah.
So
it just reminds me of the emails I get from Pastor Eric saying,
I
need you to buy some gift cards in private for me.
Those are pseudepigraphas.
Yeah, they are.
You're right. And so Hebrews passes all of those tests, and if we're going to get to the most logical conclusion of authorship, it was written by someone very, very trustworthy, who remains anonymous, which of course fits the context. If there was persecution, remaining anonymous might have allowed the leader to continue to lead, or if it was meant to be a message preached by multiple leaders, then it wasn't important for the author to be named, because this was meant to be a tool for the churches to use, which in some ways is how we write sermons here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. If that is the case, it reflects our very model some 2,000 years later, which is fascinating.
Yep.
So.
Doesn't matter whose name's on it. It's the message of our church. And so, not saying that our messages are canonical in any way, shape, or form, but just saying there was a real life setting into which a message like this, which is so pastoral, don't drift away, pay careful attention. It's so full of exhortation and encouragement that it really is a sermon to people who were drifting, a sermon to people who were experiencing persecution. And it was very easy to turn back to the state-mandated religion of the day, which is Judaism, was acceptable. So Christianity, not acceptable. So you could turn back to Judaism with really no difficulty. So why not turn back?
That's a unique thing about the Romans, is that they valued and they prized things that were old. And so when they conquered different nations and countries and kingdoms, they allowed them to basically preserve their own ways of worship. And when it came to Judaism in particular, it was old, even to the Romans.
Yeah.
And so they, in a sense, the Romans could be brutal and cruel at times. And we see that within the history borne out. But at the same time, there was a sense of respect to Judaism because it was not a new thing. Whereas Christianity, in so many ways, was absolutely a new thing.
Yeah, and in many ways more threatening to the Romans.
Yeah.
But as my mentor Brian Hull likes to say, you can't sew back up the veil that was torn by Jesus with his death. You can't sew up the veil, and that's what they were essentially doing by turning back to Judaism. And if they were trying to sew up the veil, they missed Jesus entirely. So let's talk about just Jesus, and that's what this message is all about.
Yeah, for sure. So you've got people who have, they were basically within one particular religion. And that was how they understood their relationship with God. That was probably what they were raised within. Their entire community was orchestrated around this. Then they come to a point in their lives where they realize that this is actually not the life that Jesus is inviting me into, that God is inviting me into, that what Jesus invites me into is true, and there's more here, essentially. And so they make the decision to trust Jesus. And yet now, on the other side of that decision, they're facing challenges, persecution. And so they find themselves essentially wavering between continuing to walk with Jesus, or returning back to the religion from their past and the community from their past that in so many ways probably seems far more comfortable than what they're doing in the present.
Sure.
And that is something we see play out all the time in Utah.
At large, yeah. And so, we're going to see throughout Hebrews that you got to stay with Jesus, you also stay in a Jesus community, and that's an important piece of it. So you could imagine that people start showing up to church week after week, to the gathering, and it's just getting smaller and smaller, and people are getting picked off, one by one, either turning back to Judaism or perhaps being persecuted to the point of death, and then one day someone shows up with this type of message, this type of sermon,
Yeah.
And it was the type of thing that they needed to hear, and we need to hear, because following Jesus will put us at a crossroads where sometimes turning back to a previous way of life might be more comfortable and appealing. And yet, if we do, we're going to be missing Jesus for who he is. So, and then of course, the book is a book of comparison, because for Jesus to be better, they have to compare him up against the thing that they think is maybe going to be better. And so all those things are conditioned by their religious system, the first century world that they live in, the Old Testament. And so we got to jump into that world a little bit to understand it. And so that's what can make Hebrews so powerful, but also so difficult to read at times. As I've been writing this series, it's been kicking my butt a little bit because there's so much to cover. Where do you start? Where do you finish each message? Where do you land the plane? So anyways, with all of that, let's get into it, because right away we're thrown into the ancient world of a Jewish thinker. The author of Hebrews is doing things with the Old Testament to speak to, this is what you believe, but let me tell you what's actually reality. So he's doing some things with the Old Testament that we might be uncomfortable with, but it's how the Jewish nation would have thought about these passages in the Old Testament. And so, and these people. So anyways, let's read the first chunk here of Hebrews chapter 1.
Yeah, okay. All right, picking it up, Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1. I'll take it through maybe verse 4. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. So he became as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs.
Literally every other word is a book.
There's so much.
It's crazy. It's crazy. So, so let me just throw out the major themes of this section. In just 4 verses, we have this idea of a God who speaks or reveals. That's kind of theme 1. And then we have prophets, obviously spokespeople for God throughout the Old Testament, those who speak. So you got prophets. Then you have appointed heir, okay, which is, this idea of sonship in the family, the rights and privileges and authorities of the owner of all things carry to the one who inherits all things. Yeah. So this is a way of talking about Jesus's divinity. Yeah. So you have obviously Christology right there. Then you have Creator, made the universe. Okay. Yeah. What's that? Theme 4. The Son is the radiance of. So back to Christology, the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. So more Christology. Yeah. Provided purification for sins. So now you have this picture of Old Testament sacrifice, priesthood, which is going to be a major theme throughout the book. All this is almost like the table of contents of the book, because this is what's going to unfold throughout Hebrews. Then you have sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven, which is super confusing. Not a position, not a physical locale, but a declaration of Jesus' authority.
Yeah, not a lazy boy. Position of honor and
yes.
authority.
Yeah, there you go. So then superior to the angels, that comes out of nowhere. Then back to the name he has inherited. Okay, so back to this family aspect, Jesus' position in the Trinity is superior to there. So I don't know, that's like 7 themes all at once. Jesus is better.
Yeah. And I think, maybe the first one is that God spoke and that God speaks. And that in and of itself, I think, is worth spending a little bit of time on, just to unpack the reality that God has chosen to speak, that God didn't have to speak, but made the decision to speak. On the one hand, to bring all things into being, right? Genesis 1:1, that's how creation, basically that account is recorded as God speaks and his word brings things into being. But then also he speaks for the sake of inviting us into relationship with him.
Yep. Yeah. This is an incredible intro to the message. I remember taking speech and debate in community college. I got a bad grade in that class, by the way, because they wanted me to follow a template. And I was like, I'm just a little rebellious at heart. I'm not following your dumb template. No one wants to listen to somebody where they know exactly where it's going to go. But I think what this message is doing is kind of what we do early on in a message, is we just kind of tease out, here are the major themes. Expect these to be unpacked as the message unfolds. Yeah. And you see that here. But instantly we're pulling timeless truth from this. And when the message, we wanted to compare and contrast why Jesus is better than any prophet, and why we don't need a prophet today. And the message was called God's final word. Jesus is God's final word. No prophet, no go-between, no person necessary. Yeah. We have Jesus now. Prophets were very significant for a time, but they were empowered people. They were flawed people. Their message wasn't final. Yeah. And it is now in Jesus. He's a perfect person. He has revealed God completely, and his message is fully and finally communicated.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Yeah. There's an interesting, almost like heart aspect to this as well that you probably don't find in too many places outside of Utah today. But, if you consider the fact that they're wavering, and I think in some ways, there can be a comfort with like having, I guess prophets at work or prophets to turn to. Not that they had that for 400 years at that point. John the Baptist is on the scene, and people felt differently about him, and but his intention was always to point to Jesus, as were all of the other prophets. But I feel like today in Utah, I've had conversations with people who have basically been within a religion where there's a person who's deemed a prophet that they turn to for direction and for guidance and to understand God and to know how they should relate to God and how they should live their lives. And then all of a sudden to, basically be living life where Jesus is the final word, where there is no need for a prophet because all of the other prophets, biblically speaking, were always pointing to him and he is the final word, the final communication. There's almost like a sense of, like the anchor or the compass was that prophet, and what do I do without this?
Right.
Is that okay? And I find this passage has often been really helpful in those conversations to say that Jesus is what they were always pointing to. He's the fulfillment. They are the lesser version of what he is the complete and fulfilled version of.
Which is why biblical Christianity is so centered on the Bible. Because that's how God has spoken to us. It's how Jesus has chosen to reveal his truth to us. And so Christians are people of the book. And I think Hebrews 1 lets us know that. And we can be comfortable knowing that if he can sustain all things, hold all things together by his powerful word, then when we say the Bible is the word of God, we can be confident that, we got to do the work to translate it well, but that this is God's final word to us. Bible.
Yeah. It's even like 4:12, Hebrews 4:12. It's living and active.
Yeah.
We're not studying some like ancient dead document that has nothing to do with us. Like we're not reading the Epic of Gilgamesh. Here. Like
right.
Because it's 2 Timothy 3:16, all scripture is breathed out by God. It is living and at work within our minds, our hearts, our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I didn't have a chance to preach this sermon. I studied it and got to write and write it and focus on it. I learned so much. I didn't get to preach it, which here I am now getting to preach what I wanted to be able to preach. But I think it's very common for everybody. Most people, especially secular, irreligious people, would not say I have a prophet. But I'll tell you, the way a lot of people listen to Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, and the list goes on and on. Taylor Swift, the artists of the day, or whoever it is. Everybody's got a person they go to whose word means so much to them or is authoritative to them. And so, I think everybody's got a prophet. You know what I mean? Like until they turn to Jesus. But everybody's got someone whose word is alive and active to them. I act on it. I obey it. And we shouldn't settle for someone's word if that someone is not Jesus. So anyways, it's a good little challenge there. So they would, throughout this book, we're going to see Moses' name used a lot. That was the prophet they would have wanted to turn back to. He was the superhero of superheroes, for them. And of course, to be respected, to be valued. He was very valuable, but as we'll see, Jesus is greater than Moses. So, and then you have Jesus greater than angels, which kind of comes out of left field. And once again, we're not tempted to want to turn to angels in a secular, materialistic, naturalistic society. It's like, give me a break, angels. This section is like, I'll just skip it. But once again, we have beings that we think are very, very superior and powerful. And so he had to show Jesus as better than angels. And he does it by breaking down some Old Testament passages.
Yeah. And I guess you could tease this out where people are like, I'm spiritual but not religious.
Oh, there you go.
And trying to, which I think that's a natural impulse. Like we are spiritual beings. And so the desire to somehow pursue that makes sense. But the truth is, like, if you're trying to interact with spiritual beings outside of a relationship with Jesus, that's actually a pretty dangerous thing to get into, as we talked about this past fall.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so the reason, though, that they were turning back to angels is because, their angelology, which if Mike Bell were here, he could probably talk for hours about where they got their angel worldviews from. Intertestamental books, other books, had really shaped the Jewish books, writings, had really shaped the Jewish mind around angels. I'm definitely not a scholar on that. But they were thinking, well, Jesus has a body, Angels are immaterial, so they must be better. Jesus died. Angels are not going to die a physical death, so they must be better.
Yeah.
And so for all these reasons, Jesus looked less than an angel. But then the author has to take so much time in chapters 1 and 2, explaining why he had to die, how he beats death, an angel can't beat death, and so on and so forth. So and just read a little bit more there, and we'll get into some of this angel stuff.
Yeah, okay. So verse 5. For to which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my son, today I have become your father"? Quoting from Psalm 2, a psalm that's all about the, basically the king that God appoints who is over all other kings and kingdoms. Or again, "I will be his father and he will be my son," quoting 2 Samuel 7:14. It's where God makes a promise to David that one of his descendants will be a king and that throne will never end. Verse 6, and again, when God brings his firstborn into the world, he says, "Let all God's angels worship him." That's Deuteronomy 32:43. Something interesting there, we were just actually talking about it before this. We see that if you dig into the manuscripts, the Masoretic text doesn't have that, but the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint was the Bible of those who wrote our New Testament.
Yep.
It has it there. And so kind of an interesting thing.
He's just basically connecting the dots from three different places in the Septuagint. Septuagint means 70. Break down that word. It was the Greek.
I know 70 because
70 Jewish scholars, elders.
They all translated the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek, and at the end of it, they all had the exact translation. That's the story.
Yeah. Uh-huh. So Septuagint. I don't know where the gent comes from, but the septa part is 70.
Yeah.
70. Yeah. I gotta look that up. Don't just have that on lock. But he's going to three different places in the Septuagint: the Psalms, the history stuff in Samuel, and then Deuteronomy, the Moses stuff. So just making a blanket case, like, look, guys, connect the dots here. This, and this tell us that Jesus, the Son, is superior to angels. And so that's what we got to see there. And so he's uploading these treasured texts for the Hebrew people and showing how Jesus, his identity is better than angels because he is the fulfillment of these passages. So, and then we got the next part. And speaking of the angels, he says he makes his angels spirits and his servants flames of fire. But about the Son, he says, so here's the comparisons. He's comparing Jesus to angels in these ways and showing that Jesus is better. But about the Son, he says, your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has set you above your companions by anointing you with the oil of joy. So he's taking all these incredible passages that would have been quoted, would have been studied, and he's just connecting all the pieces to paint this picture that Jesus is better than angels. So don't go back into worshiping angels. Don't think about angels as more than Jesus. That's chapter 1. And then in verse 14, he wraps up by saying, are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation? Point being, angels are real. They're immaterial beings who serve God, serve people, and Jesus is better than that. So that's chapter 1 in a nutshell. Now, of course, we could go into these references, but we don't have time for that today.
Okay, one real quick thing.
Hit it.
You were talking about how those first three references come from different points
in
the Hebrew Bible. Well, the Jewish Bible is actually split up into three different sections. Right? The Torah, first 5 books of the Bible, or the law. You've got the writings, which gets into a lot of the poetic books. And then you've got the prophets. Some of the books of history within the Jewish threefold division are included within the prophets. So he actually, in these 3 quotes, he quotes from all 3 sections.
Yeah, Deuteronomy's in the Torah.
Yeah, Deuteronomy's Torah.
Yep.
Psalms, the writings. And 2 Samuel is technically a prophetic book, according to the Jewish understanding.
Right.
Yeah.
What an airtight argument. I mean, this guy, or I guess it could be a gal, whoever
could be Priscilla.
Yeah, whoever penned Hebrews is just brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the word of God, alive and active, right?
Yeah.
So that's the angels. That's the angels section. And in the message, we did a little list of what makes Jesus better than angels. I hope that was a helpful list. And now we're into chapter 2, and here's the first pastoral exhortation. We must pay the most careful attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. So that's now how we know they're drifting away. He wouldn't need to say that unless they were actually beginning to drift back to Judaism, drift back to Moses, drift back to angels as over and above Jesus. And so he says, don't drift away. Now, drifting is really common. You ever drifted away? You ever had seasons of that?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there have been like micro seasons.
Yeah,
There's never
that's
been
kind of
like
what I mean.
Yeah, there's never been a massive season in my life, but there have been in lives of people that I'm friends with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember this season. I had been a youth pastor, and I was about to. But there's about a 6-month window. I was finishing seminary, and we were kind of in between churches, and I was working at a bike shop. And man, we were not connected to a church community for like 6 months. Like we would just go to church when we felt like it, and we would pick whatever church seemed, fun that weekend. And I look back on those 6 months, and I regret how I approached that season. I don't think it was good for us spiritually. I don't know that we. I would say we drifted away from community. And if that is happening, that's a drift that Hebrews wants to correct. Mm-hmm. I think there's always this, there's always a need to pay careful attention to how you're trusting Jesus and obeying him. And I think that's what we see here in chapter 2. Yeah. For since the message spoken through angels was binding, and every violation and disobedience received its just punishment, how shall we escape if we ignore so great a salvation?
So that's an interesting point. That's kind of another angle on why he's doing the argument around angels in particular. And you don't actually see this in the Old Testament itself, but in the writings around the Old Testament, essentially like Jewish commentary. If you go back to the book of Exodus, right, people of Israel are basically in slavery, in oppression in Egypt. They cry out to God to rescue them. He raises up Moses, the guy we've been talking about, basically, the most significant leader in the history of the people of Israel, rescues them out of Egypt, brings them to the wilderness. Moses goes to the top of this mountain where God's presence is. They form this unique relationship where God's their God and Israel's his people. And the Jewish commentaries basically speak to angels being the ones who deliver the law to Moses on the top of the mountain. And so if Jesus is greater than the angels, he's a greater messenger who delivers a greater message. And for the people of Israel, you've got that threefold division of the writings, the law, the writings, the prophets. The law is what Moses wrote and is directly tied to what was given to him on the mountain. That is the foundation. Like everything else is viewed through the lens of that filter. And yet Jesus is a greater messenger delivering a greater message, which is the gospel.
Yeah. He says, this salvation was first announced by the Lord, was confirmed to us by those who heard him. This is that section before he goes back into quoting the Old Testament. God also testified to it by signs, wonders, and various miracles. Of course, we know that from the Gospels.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And by gifts of the Holy Spirit distributed according to his will. We know that from the book of Acts.
Book of Acts.
Yep. And so he's just connecting the dots to this story that Jesus is the fulfillment and the culmination of God's work throughout history.
Yeah. Another kind of interesting little detail is that, Jesus is the one who first proclaims the gospel, the message of salvation. And then the author of Hebrews is saying that message was confirmed to us, to you and me, through those who heard him, the apostles. And so that means that both the author and the audience are in the same position as you and me, in that they have received the message from Jesus basically through the filter of the apostles, which is, they were probably in direct relationship with them. We, at the very least, have the writings, and those are the New Testament writings.
Yeah. What do you make of this punishment part? Every violation and disobedience received its just punishment. So, of course, you see that punishment throughout the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And we're going to see more of that as Hebrews goes on. We're going to look at their hearts were hardened. They didn't enter the land. They failed to enter his rest. We're going to break that down later in the series. And he says, how shall we escape if we ignore so great a salvation?
Yeah. I think you got to take it through the filter of the covenants. Right? So in the Old Testament, Moses... there's the Mosaic covenant where Deuteronomy chapter 28 outlines basically if you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. And it is very specific about what will happen. And you see that throughout the entire Old Testament. But even what we get into later in Hebrews is how Jesus has formed a new covenant that it doesn't work that way, where it's not, we don't do good or we don't get good or get bad on the basis of what we do or do not do. Our relationship with God is now on the basis of what Jesus has done, his perfection, his righteousness. But we do have the freedom to basically neglect it, to walk away from it, to ignore it.
Yeah.
And I think in those seasons of, those seasons of drifting, there are consequences that come with that just as a result of our own decisions.
Yep, that's right. Those consequences. Now, I think when people with a religious mindset call it, what would I say, a conditional covenant approach. Religion is a conditional covenant approach, meaning I do and God does, I don't. I get this. If you read a conditional covenant concept into if we ignore so great a salvation, it's very like, oh, every day, am I ignoring it? He's going to get me. Am I ignoring it? He's going to get me.
Yeah.
The point he's just saying is stop drifting. Appreciate your salvation.
Yeah.
And it will go well for you. Meaning you'll enjoy the byproduct of being with Jesus.
Yeah.
It's that type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. To ignore this is to live out of alignment with what you're made for. And
Yep.
so live in alignment with it.
Exactly. So the next thing he has to break down is why Jesus is fully human. And that's the next part. So he's compared him with angels as superior spiritually, to angels.
Yeah.
And now he's going to say, but even by being human, that makes Jesus better than angels, not less than angels. And I think it was a common thought, even with Gnosticism floating around, that the physical was less than, the physical could be bad. If you have a body, it's somehow dirty, and the soul, the spirit, that's the better way, And because Jesus had a body, they might think, well, Jesus was less than. And he has to go on to explain, having a body actually makes him better. He did become lower than the angels, so to speak, by entering into humanity to beat death and to take our place. And that's the next argument. Anything you want to summarize from chapter 2 as we're coming to the end of our time together?
Yeah, just that he's quoting Psalm 8. That's the one he spends a lot of time with there. And Psalm 8, the nouns through that can be read in either, you see it referenced in both like a plural and in a singular, which is kind of interesting. I haven't dug into what's actually happening in the Hebrew there to kind of be able to explain that. But you do see it in the footnotes, both around Psalm 8 and in Hebrews here. But that psalm just basically speaks to, like who are we that God cares about us? And, we're a little lower than the angels, but now crowned with glory and honor. And the author of Hebrews takes this in the singular fashion and applies it to Jesus directly, that he became lower than the angels in taking on our humanity, tasted death on our behalf, rose in victory over it, is now crowned with glory and honor. And the next line in the psalm is that, he's put everything under our feet, and he's saying that one day everything will be subjected to him. We've seen like little lower than the angels, crowned with glory and honor. Those two have been fulfilled. This third one, we're still looking forward to the fulfillment of that.
Yep.
But even prior to that, in the present, we do see Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Trevor, there's so much more here that we don't have time to cover. I'm looking at, through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. That can be a challenging passage. He talks about this family idea again, brothers and sisters. And these are all ways of just saying Jesus is fully God, fully human, transcendent, bigger than anything, immanent, closer than we could ever imagine. And I think those are two key concepts that summarize 1 and 2. Transcendent, fully God, over and above everything, immanent, fully human, close to us. And so transcendent, immanent, I think that's a good way to end and summarize chapters 1 and 2. Yeah. For more resources, we always recommend the Bible Project, and that would just be a great place to study the book of Hebrews more deeply. We'll be back next week, walking into chapter 3. We promise we're going to slow down a little bit. We won't cover 2 chapters every time we preach through this series. But hey, hope you're digging into Hebrews. If you're not in a community group, it's not too late to get into one and go through this as well. My community group starts Wednesday. Trevor on the book of Hebrews. I'm excited about that.
Nice. Good stuff.
Yep. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Thanks again for joining us for the Fully Delighted podcast. If you enjoyed this hopeful and helpful resource, we'd love to have you leave us a review or share an episode with a friend. For more information about SMCC, please visit us at our website at smccutah.org. Thank you for trusting us with your time, and we look forward to having you back again soon.